Welcome to Food for Thought podcast, the place to explore, celebrate, and manifest a life motivated by unconditional compassion and optimal wellness. Today's episode is Time is Passing. How do you want to spend it? Before we begin, my name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. You can find me at joyfulvegan.com and on social media. You can find my books wherever books are sold, and you can join me in my online cooking classes or in my vegan trips around the world. This podcast is possible because of the support of listeners like you, and you can join other supporters by going to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau to become a supporter today at your chosen level. There are different perks for the different levels. Thank you so much in advance for supporting this podcast, for subscribing to it, and for listening. I don't know if you know this, but I'm a huge fan of J.R.R. Tolkien's novels, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings books, Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, The Return of the King. And I'm not going to lie, I am a huge dorky fan of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies, not The Hobbit, not The Hobbit, but Lord of the Rings, the three movies that were made. Gosh, I don't even know now. Oh, I feel like it was a long time ago. So you probably know this story by now, even if you haven't read it. In short, Frodo, a hobbit, a creature. Well, this is the Lord of the Rings, obviously. This isn't, The Hobbit is mostly about Bilbo Baggins, but in the Lord of the Rings, Frodo Baggins is a hobbit. He's a creature of unlikely heroism, and he's tasked with a daunting quest to return a magic/evil ring to the Mountain of Doom. Need I say more? And along the way encounters trials and tribulations while being given support by a few other hobbits, by a wizard, and 2 humans. Frodo, after enduring a wound that will never heal and facing death incarnate, he's overwhelmed, he's overburdened, and needless to say, he's feeling a tad unprepared for this burden. Taking a moment's rest in the caves of Moria, Frodo says to Gandalf, who's a wizard, "I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened." And Gandalf, in his ultimate wisdom, responds, "So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." I am not kidding. I want that written on my gravestone. I love that moment. Okay, there's kind of this thing in my life. You should know this is actually very funny. It's actually very funny. Maybe you won't think it's funny. So I have watched Lord of the Rings so many times that the inflections, like there's so many words, there's so many lines in these movies because they're so long and there are 3 of them, that there's not a day that goes by that I don't somehow just inadvertently or advertently somehow quote the movie. But it could even just be an inflection that I hear. David might say something and I'm like, "Oh, I think you just heard, did you just hear that? And you remember who said that?" And he's like, "Oh my God." Like, I wasn't quoting Lord of the Rings. I'm like, "I know, but it sounded like it just because of the inflection." So there are a lot of quote-worthy lines from the films as well as from the novels. Some quotes in the film, some lines in the film are not in the novels, but this one is. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. How many of us have said something similar? I wish this hadn't happened. I wish this hadn't happened to me. I wish I hadn't lived to see this time, this war, this massacre, this pandemic, this political divisiveness, this climate crisis, this increase in animal exploitation, whatever it is. And I guarantee you, everyone, whatever time they've lived in, whatever war they fought in, whatever challenge they were tasked with, whatever tragedy they witnessed, everyone, regardless of the time period they lived in, has uttered those words, or at least thought them. I wish it need not have happened in my time. Tolkien certainly would have said these words. He wrote Lord of the Rings after he returned from the trenches of World War I, the First World War, sick, exhausted, grief-stricken and traumatized by the deaths of his comrades and closest friends, having witnessed slaughter and suffering beyond what most of us could ever imagine, Tolkien picked up his pen and wrote, "I wish none of this had happened. So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." So here we are in our time. We may feel burdened and overwhelmed and afraid and uncertain of the future, of the present, of things we can't control, of things we can control. So how do we manage that? We're living in uncertain times, but who hasn't? There are no guarantees in this life. We can't control what's outside of us, but we can control how we respond to what happens outside of us and what happens inside of us for the most part. Now, I know there's been a lot of conversations during the pandemic about the pressure people have felt about how to use the time during lockdown. And I say this realizing that lockdown is starting to, lift a bit, but this applies whether we're talking about a pandemic and lockdown or not. The idea that we should make the most of our days, that we can control what happens to us. And people think, well, no, we're all victims of something. We can't control what happens to us. And I don't agree. I've seen backlash at the idea or suggestion that we use our time well, including during this pandemic, as if such a suggestion means that, we should be writing the next great American novel or finding a cure for the coronavirus pandemic while we, shelter in place at home. And if we don't, we're a failure. Of course, that is not what I'm saying at all. And that kind of pressure is unreasonable and it's untenable. But there are ways we can make use of our time all the time, every day, every moment, right? So that when we look back at the end of the day, so that when we look back at the end of 3 months, so that when we look back at the last year, whatever it is, we're proud of how we spent it. And as I said, we can take it in much smaller doses, like a 24-hour period. And in fact, that's what I would argue, is that we should be asking all the time how we can best use our time, not just during pandemics and lockdowns, not just during times of trauma and tumult, but always, right? Every day we have the opportunity when we wake up to ask, how do I want to use this time? How do I want to use this day? How do I want to use this night? Could be reading a novel, could be reading a trilogy like Lord of the Rings, could be reading a novel or a trilogy that you've been meaning to read, could be watching a documentary series, it could be decluttering our house, it could be planting a garden, learning to bake bread, spending time with our loved ones. Could be running, walking, hiking, exercising, or it could be writing the next great novel. What we choose is up to us, and that's the point. It's okay if we decide to spend our time on social media. Also, I want to just clarify that this doesn't mean only creating things of great value and worth, right? But one way I gauge that is deciding that indeed, if that's how I want to spend my time, fine. But I want to feel that when I'm done doing that thing, I feel fed and not depleted. I feel good and not disappointed, and that I feel productive and not like I'm wasting time. And some of that is how we frame it. There's a time for being at rest. There's a time for being in motion, right? There's a time for just doing nothing and not creating and just having fun and connecting with people, right? So social media can do that. It's not necessarily wasting time. So some of it is how we frame it, but it's also about, being clear about that, maybe time boxing the time we spend on any of these things so that we, feel that we're getting something accomplished, that we're doing the thing that we set out to do and not letting that just run over into all our other hours, right? So spend time on social media, but maybe time box it for an hour or a half hour split up, 1 half hour here and a half hour there. Time box even writing for an hour or exercising for an hour or walking, whatever it is. Time boxing I find is very helpful because then you get the thing done. You're focused completely on that time. I am not a fan of multitasking. And then you move on to the next thing as opposed to that thing just spilling over. That's when I think we feel that we wasted time, when we planned on spending a certain amount of time on this one thing, but then we just got carried away and we just kind of went over into the next several minutes and an hour. So So how do we want to spend the time we have, right? Time is going to pass anyway. How do we want to spend it? And I think about that also when there's a certain goal that you want to reach, whatever that goal is. Could be learning a language, could be learning to cook, could be losing weight, could be getting stronger, could be whatever it is. Like, time's going to pass. So like if you're like, oh God, it's going to take me 3 months or 6 months or 12 months to do this thing, to accomplish this goal. Well, 3 months or 6 months or 12 months is going to pass anyway. So how do you want to spend it? Right? Now, this can be tricky because I admit to being someone who doesn't like wasting time. I put a lot of pressure on myself to accomplish things, to get things done, to check things off of my to-do list. And I actually put relaxing on my to-do list. Like, I just time box things. That's what helps me. So I'm not saying that every second of your day needs to be packed with to-dos. What I'm just suggesting is that this is our time. How do we want to spend it? Right? I mean, if you think about time as a commodity and you think about the preciousness of it, and would you just give it away? Think about it like money. If someone passed you on the street and said, give me all the money in your pockets, and you gave them the money, they're like, give me more money that you have in your banks. And you're like, no, like that's mine. Like, I value that. I'm not just going to throw it away. Or if maybe they didn't say give it to me, they just said throw it away. Right? Or just do this with that money. And you say, no, I want to be thoughtful about how I want to spend that money. I don't want to just needlessly throw it over there and over there without making a plan for it and kind of having a plan for it. Well, think about your time that way. We do it all the time, though. We let things suck up our time. People suck up our time. We let ourselves get carried away, and we forget to own it and value it. So that's what I'm suggesting, is that to me is what that means is, in general, how do we want to spend our time, our lives? And that's what I'm suggesting, valuing the time we have and asking ourselves, how do we want to spend it? Resting, socializing, planning, thinking, meditating, just being are also meaningful ways to spend time. It doesn't have to just be creating or accomplishing something. So what I try to do is just make sure that that's how I want to spend my time and be clear about it. And I will be honest, I have never said the words, I'm bored. Like, I probably did when I was young, but there are so many ways to fill our day with meaningful, enriching activities, proactively or in response to things that bring you fear or pain or anxiety. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And that doesn't have to mean this big decision about our lives. It could just mean this 24-hour period. It could just mean this next hour. But our time is ours, and we can choose how to spend it. There's another similar concept written in Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and it goes like this: you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and think and say. I love that. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and think and say. It's similar to, like, if you knew you were going to die tomorrow, how would you spend your time right now? But I like the specifics of it. I like let that knowledge, that wisdom, that awareness determine what you do and say and think. The idea is to enjoy life, to make a positive contribution to the world, to value time, to create meaning, and to live with joy and compassion. And there's so many ways to do that. I tend to do this. I'll share how I do it. I'd be very interested to know how you do it. First of all, one way to do this is I am very grateful for what I have every moment. Just period, full stop. I'm grateful every single second for what I have. Like, I shouldn't be here. Like, there's just no reason I should be here doing what I do, living the life I live. So every day I wake up, from the moment I wake up, I smile, and I am so grateful that I'm awake, that I have this time. And so that's what I do in my head. Just kind of, I already list the things I'm grateful for, but write it in a journal as well. I know that helps a lot of people. I also decide the night before a few things I want to do the following day so that when I wake up, I'm already oriented toward having what I hope is a meaningful day. So decide the night before kind of when you wake up, like what is it that you want to kind of get started doing? Could be anything, whatever it is for you. Another way I do this being making the most use of my time, is I really love lists. I have several journals, I have several books of lists, and I'm only sharing what I do. This might not work for you, but I love lists and it keeps me mindful of how I want to spend my time. So I have one journal that's a writing journal, just like general thoughts and feelings. I have a commonplace journal for favorite quotes and passages. I've talked about this on the podcast. I have a garden journal to keep notes about what I need to do and buy and plant and prune and move and cover and support, like whatever in my gardens. There's like a lot to do in the gardens. I have a daily to-do journal of things like for the day. Like it's mostly work related, but it's also personal. So a lot of to-do lists. I also have a line a day journal, just a line a day. And I use that typically for intentions for the day or things I want to remember when I look back. I've talked about this line a day journal before. I really like it. And so all that's to say, I plan what I want to do each day and I create my journal and I create my lists and I create my intentions for the day. I've become more flexible about timelines because I can be pretty rigid and hard on myself, but I really like writing this stuff down. So creating some kind of plan for yourself, I think is really helpful. Another thing I do, which might sound weird, but I'll just share with you what I do. More than deciding what I want to do each day, or in addition to deciding what I want to do each day, I also decide how I want to feel. Believe it or not, I find it a really exciting question to ask because it really centers the power in your own self. Because depending on the answer, I will make different decisions for the day. Now, you can ask this question, of course, throughout the day. It doesn't have to just be in the morning. How do I want to feel today? I mean, but like if there's something especially stressing me out, how do I want to feel? Right? I just got a phone call in the middle of recording this. And it was someone we're doing some work on our house and told me that they're not coming until later. Now, I could easily just react and be like, I really need this done. This is really frustrating. I had my expectations. You said you were coming, right? But how do I want to feel? I want to feel generous. I want to feel calm. I want to feel non-reactive. I mean, this is just one example. So based on that being how I want to feel, and it's not about, I don't want to react, right? How do I want to feel? I respond very differently. Now that means I'm kind of deciding this very quickly as I'm having this conversation. But as, he was talking, this is just one example. As he was talking, I could easily have just been like, oh God, this is so annoying. And I do get annoyed at things. I mean, like, of course I do. But I don't want to just react. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. I don't want to react to everything that's going on externally. I want to be able to respond, but decide how I want to feel. And so that question I find super exciting because then I decide how I want to respond and what I want to do and how I want to behave. That affects how I feel. So I just find that really empowering. If I'd be interested to know if you want to try that, flipping it around as opposed to just what do I want to do today so that I feel accomplished or that I feel good. How do I want to feel today? And then based on that answer, I'll make different decisions about the day. You know what I mean? I think it's kind of cool. So it's just more proactive than reactive. And that's why I keep coming back to what happens in the world is outside of our control. What's in our control is how we react to what happens in the world. And so by asking, how do I want to feel? It means I'm in control because I'm not swayed here and there. My mood isn't swayed. My energy isn't swayed. My plans for the day aren't derailed based on what happens out there. Someone else, action, behavior, stuff, things, events, occurrences, whatever. None of that matters. What matters is how I feel, how I respond, how I act, how I perceive things. I'm in control, and that feels pretty good, especially for someone who's a control freak. So I hope that brings you some inspiration. I hope it doesn't bring you pressure. The point is to bring you some inspiration to feel empowered and to feel that you are in control and that you have agency. That's the point, is that things will happen outside of our control, things that are hard, things that are unpleasant, things that are challenging, bearing witness to things that are unpleasant and difficult, even things we signed up for, but which can have rough edges. We can and should step up to meet them and do our part. But the wise among us know what's ours and what's not ours, what's in our control and what's out of it, what's the best use of our time and what's not. So I hope that helps you not lament that things happen. It's called life, but rather seize the opportunity to make the most of the time that is given to us. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts and if this helped at all. For the animals, this is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.